OK. Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, we'll begin our meeting. With respect to the list of speakers, the clerk and I... Okay, just a moment. All right. Colleagues, we'll begin in person. I call the meeting to order.
Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule sous forme hybride.
The meeting will take place in a hybrid manner according to the order. We will be attending either in person or by Zoom. For your information, web broadcasting will show only the person speaking and not the entire committee.
Of the recommendations from health authorities, as well as a directive of the Board of Internal Economy on Friday, January 28th, 2022, to remain healthy and safe, all those attending the meeting in person are to maintain 2-meter physical distancing, must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room, and it is highly recommended that the mask be worn at all times, including when seated, must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the provided hand sanitizer in the room. En tant que président,
as chair, I will enforce these measures during the entire meeting, and I thank members in advance for their cooperation. For those who are participating virtually, here are some rules. You can speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation will be available for the meeting. You can choose at the bottom of your screen between the floor and English or French. If you're not getting interpretation, please inform me immediately, and we will make sure that interpretation is re-established before resuming work. For members taking part in person, do as you usually do when the committee meets in person in a meeting room. Before speaking, please wait for me to recognize you by your name. If you are participating through video conference, please click on the microphone icon in order to activate your microphone. For those in the room, your microphone will be controlled, as usual, by the person in charge of procedures. We would remind you that all comments should be addressed to the President. When you speak, please speak slowly and clearly. When you're not speaking, your microphone should be muted. As concerns the list of speakers, the clerk of the committee and myself will do our best to maintain the proper speaking order.
Technical challenges arise, please advise me. Please note that we may need to suspend a few minutes as we need to ensure all members are able to participate fully. Conformément donc à l'article 108, paragraphe 3, alinéa F du règlement et à la motion adoptée par le comité le lundi 31 janvier 2022, le comité reprend son étude des mesures gouvernementales pour protéger et promouvoir le français au Québec et au Canada. J'aimerais maintenant souhaiter la bienvenue à nos témoins. Durant la première heure de la réunion, par vidéoconférence, apparaîtront les personnes suivantes. Donc, Mme Lily Christ, présidente du comité d'administration de la Fédération des francophones de la Colombie-Britannique, M. Robert Laplante, directeur de l'Action nationale, ainsi que les juristes de Power Law, Maître Mark Power et Maître Darius Bossé, avocat. Un maximum de 5 minutes. 5 minutes sera accordé pour les allocutions, après quoi nous procéderons à une série de questions. Je vous ferai signe lorsqu'il vous restera 1 minute. Donc, bienvenue à tous et à toutes, bienvenue aux témoins de la première ronde, de la première heure. Je vous invite donc à faire votre déclaration. On commencera avec Mme Lily Christ pour 5 minutes.
Bonjour, merci. Merci beaucoup de nous avoir invités à partager la situation, les enjeux des francophones de la Colombie-Britannique. En tant que membre du comité permanent des langues officielles, nous comptons sur vous pour faire du droit.
Non, Madame List, un instant, Madame Christ. Un instant. Madame
Oui.
Christ, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Je ne sais pas si c'est une question de signal. J'arrête le temps pour vous laisser la chance, mais on vous entend très mal. Ça coupe, ça revient, ça coupe.
D'accord. Est-ce que ça continue à couper là?
Allez-y.
D'accord. Donc, je vais reprendre. Nous souhaitons vous parler aujourd'hui.
So today, we'd like to thank you for having invited us. As members of the Standing Committee on Official Languages, we're counting on you to advance our rights and help in the development of Francophone communities in a minority situation. Modernization of the Act. Nationally, those responsible for coordinating the enforcement of the Act on federal territory in order to demand certain results. We'd like clarifications about Part 7 of the Act by clarifying the notion of affirmative measures, including clarification on how institutions should consult minorities and the inclusion of the obligation to include linguistic clauses that are robust in agreements, in FPT agreements. Also an obligation that for the government to develop an immigration policy. We would like to have robust clauses in FPT agreements. We would like to see the government develop a policy with respect to Francophone immigration. We would like to see the demographic weight of Francophones reestablished and also powers to levy fines and issue sanctions for the Commissioner of Official Languages, including the ability to levy fines in cases where linguistic obligations are not respected. Now, with respect to British Columbia itself, with respect to British Columbia, our demand is intrinsically linked to our court case, which ended with a verdict of the Federal Appeal Court on January 28th last. You'll find more information in the open letter, which we published last Friday. The court decided that the province was sovereign in devolution with respect to the length of the agreement. We are systematically losing services because in British Columbia there are no laws on language and therefore no policy. We would like the legislation to be specific and the Act to be specific on this kind of agreement. We are counting. The interpreter apologizes, but the sound is cutting out.
Francophone n'était atteinte depuis presque 20 ans. Il est urgent que des mesures de rattrapage.
We need to catch up and we need to have things fixed. The lack of an agreement on targets has not helped. 30 seconds. Thank you. We're relying on your commitment. We're relying on your commitment. Thank you, Madam. We'll now hear from Mr. Robert Laplante, Director of Action Nationale. Mr. Laplante, you have the floor. Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Action Nationale has been around for 105 years. It was created to promote the French language all over our territory. We have remained faithful to our principles, which was stated in the first magazine. It is for Francophones of America, all those who speak French in Quebec stand in solidarity over these years of work in which we paid particular attention, serious attention to the changing rights of minorities and to the changing situation of French speakers. In this, two observations are clear today. The first is the erosion of our demographic weight. It's taking place all over Canada, in Quebec and elsewhere. Now, it's not happening in the same way everywhere, but this first observation, which is explained by our changing demography and our society, especially with respect to immigration and family policies and community development. Besides this, there is another observation, and that is the inadequacy of the legal framework and the constitutional framework. And these are the two most powerful tools we have to mitigate our becoming a minority. This is shown in the literature all over the world. The security of French is not a sure thing. And this legislation should be there to protect minorities, but also Quebecers who face the competition of another language, and which is a basic flaw, a conceptual flaw in the Official Languages Act. It is indefensible to claim that Quebec should be dealt with in a symmetrical way to the rest of Canada, and with the situation of Anglophone minorities, and you cannot compare Anglophone minorities in Quebec and Francophone minorities in the rest of Canada. There was one minority, and that is the Francophone minority. And this includes Quebec and its territory. So the Official Languages Act missed its mark, and the situation has been worsened by Ottawa, which has not only created a distorted approach, and also by the Anglophone fact in Quebec and the Anglophone institutions. And there are figures that have been established by various experts, and which we can see just through common sense. You cannot compare the Anglophone minority in Quebec to any Francophone minority in Canada. And this conceptual flaw places Anglophones in Quebec in the same situation as Francophones in the rest of Canada, and the disparities in treatment between communities have been aggravated and worsened, and Ottawa's interventions have contributed to fund a privileged position. You have 30 seconds, sir. They have funded Anglophone privilege, and we think that the situation has to be remedied, and funding to this community should be ceased, and it should be go towards improving minority situations in Canada. It is underfunded, and thank you, Mr. Laplante. I'm very sorry to interrupt you. I'm trying to do so as politely as possible. Later, you can continue on when questions are put to you. And now, Mr. Power or Mr. Basset? Good afternoon. I'm Marc Power. I'm a lawyer. I'm with my colleague Darius Basset, who comes from Madawaska. I'm from Toronto. I'm Marc Power. But my first language was French. My mother comes from Kapuskasing in the north of Ontario. We represent the British Columbia Federation of Francophones. You've just heard from our president, Ms. Christ. I want to discuss the ruling of the Federal Appellate Court some weeks ago in January. And my presentation is on Part 7 of the Official Languages Act. There are other things I could say, but we'll stick with Part 7. To support what we have to say and try to help the committee with its work and help the analysts, you received by email virtually and materially a binder of information and a document. So for those of you who received it in PDF, there are bookmarks to allow you to find what you need in the documents. There is a 5-page document available in French and in English, of course, which summarizes our comments on the appellate court's ruling. This is the Federal Court of Appeal's decision, which is annotated.
That we noted to facilitate your reading. Some passages are underlined in yellow. Bookmark B is the Official Languages Act, the current one, or excerpt of this act, indicating by underlining and striking out the effect that Bill C-32 would have had if it had been if it had received sanction last June. Bookmark C are bills that your predecessors already filed and considered, and the final one is the current Bill C-11 concerning communications. The Federal Court of Appeal, after 10 years, it took about 10 years, issued a fantastic decision which favors the advancement of French in Canada, finally. And this allowed clarification of several things related to Part 7 of the Official Languages Act, especially in the way they affect federal provincial agreements when the Government of Canada decides to withdraw from a field of shared jurisdiction. There are at least two major gains realized before the Federal Court of Appeal. So it's consultation and the idea of linguistic clauses. But what we have to note is that Bill C-32, tabled in June 2021, is not good for French outside of Quebec and is not very good for French in Quebec. It's not very good for Anglophones in Quebec. There's much work to be done so that the reform of the Federal Official Languages Act can help us live in French, whether we be in Quebec or outside of Quebec. You have 40 seconds. In terms of consultation, the Federal Court of Appeal concludes on page 69 of tab A that consultation is important, that we need to know the needs of the Francophone minority, that this is a requirement that comes out of Part 7 on the Official Languages Act, how to carry out consultations, who to consult, and so let's avoid another 10 years of disputes. Let's clarify these things in the next Official Languages Act. Clause 7 requires consultation. Thank you, Mr. Power. Now we'll start with the first round of questions. We'll start with our first Vice Deputy, Mr. Joël Godin. Well, on this Valentine's Day, Mr. Chair, this is completely appropriate, and to see you in the flesh is wonderful. So my 5 minutes will start now. Yes, or my 6 minutes rather. I'd like to thank our witnesses, Madame Christ, Mr. O'Hara, Mr. Power, and Mr. Laplante. My first question is for Mr. Laplante. You said in your introduction that there was an exhausting battle, and I think you're right. And you have suggested some funding and to eliminate overfunding in terms of Anglophones and increase funding for Francophones. So besides money, can you identify concrete actions? Because now we're looking for the promotion and protection of the French language in Quebec and elsewhere in Canada. So could you help us to identify solutions? I don't want 25 detail points, but if you could identify 3 concrete actions that would protect and promote French language. Mr. Chair, I'm happy to be able to explain to the committee and answer the MP that the first thing to do in this sense is quite relevant today. It's giving an example. The federal government should impose on itself an impeccable conduct in terms of respect of both official languages in Canada. So there have been recent appointments and interventions of ministers which really led to disappointment because it seemed to be against the objectives of the law and the government's own objectives. Second point is to make an end to this competition of languages, which is supported by legal interventions nourished by the erroneous concept of minorities, linguistic minorities in Quebec and in Canada, and also in terms of work, of employment. The federal government has not disputed the Quebec's linguistic organization and putting into place measures of resistance to the imposition and the respect in societies under federal charter or companies under the federal charter. The third, more diffuse suggestion is the respect of competencies, especially in education and health, especially in terms of the promotion of the use of English in Quebec, means that in the field of healthcare, there are tens of millions of dollars that are granted to literally undermine. Sorry, Mr. Laplante, I'm sorry I have to interrupt you because with all the respect due to you, I would like to ask questions to the people from the power jurists. So thank you very much. Your answers are very satisfactory. So my next question, well, philosophically, I would like to express something I ask myself. We're working in terms of improving the Official Languages Act. The problem, in my opinion, and Mr. O'Hara or Mr. Power, I'd like to hear you tell me about this. We're treating both languages in a symmetrical way. And we understand that in French there are 2 official languages, but there's one that's in a problematic situation, and that's French. So how can we work to protect both languages when the true problem is the French language? Can you please enlighten me on your perception of this, of the protection and promotion of the language that's in a situation of difficulty? The best way to help French, using the Federal Official Languages Act, be it Ottawa, Vancouver, New Brunswick, Quebec, or Montreal, or in Quebec, Lévis, it's once and for all have a central agency be in charge, the Treasury Board. Currently, no one's in charge, and no one is able to really bang the minister's table when necessary, bang their fist on the minister's table. If the Treasury Board becomes the responsible group, it has to require from the other federal institutions to act. So we'll solve several problems. So work in French in Bagotville or in Gatineau or elsewhere. That, and there I'm directing you to tab B because I think you do have a paper copy of the, so on page 108, you can see the number. You can see things that Bill C-32 would have done by allowing Treasury Board to carry out certain actions to help French by requiring nothing important, because on page 109, what C-32 would require would be supervision, and no more than that. Thank you, Mr. Power. Now we will go to the next intervener, Ms. Patricia Latazzo. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses who are here with us today. It's a very important day for this file.
To Maître Power and Maître Bossé. First of all, I'd like to commend both of you and your colleagues for all the legal work that you've done over the years before the courts and having them recognize and uphold the rights of our linguistic minority communities across the country. I read with great interest the recent Court of Appeal judgment concerning the FCB and welcome not only the timing of it, but also the essence and more specifically to the part of the judgment which overturns Justice Gaston's decision. So in your legal opinion, I'd like to hear from you, what is this recent decision helping or hindering the proposed amendments of the OLA found in the old version, I'm going to call it the old version of Bill C-32 that was first introduced in June 2021?
The decision shines tremendous light on the major problems with the existing Official Languages Act. L'arrêt de la Cour d'appel fédérale démontre à quel point
the federal court decision shows to what point legislative inaction in Quebec is creating problems in terms of official languages, Francophone and Anglophone. If you look at tab C, a bill from 1977 that died on the order bill on page 112 would have had as effect for Ottawa requiring that money directed to provinces be spent to help us, the Francophones, or help us in terms of official languages. Even the Bloc Québécois proposed the same thing in 1997 at Bill D. Could we please add details in the Official Languages Act? So we will work on other things as lawyers help us. In order to transmit language and culture, we need to have a much more detailed Official Languages Act. You know what to do, and I implore you to act. And in that same vein, Mr. Power, when you said that Bill C-32 is not good for Francophones outside of Quebec or within Quebec, and also not good for Anglophones in Quebec, there is much work to be done. So do you see is that being done through regulations or in a new, more sound part that will be put in law? So what do you think of taking regulations and inserted into Part 7 so it can be complete?
Ça prend des règlements. On nous avait...
It takes regulations. We were promised regulations in 1988. And there's only one that was only revised once. To do what? Just because of internet coming in. We've never had regulations on Part 7, Part 1, or Part 2. For any part, the future of Parliament, the future of official languages, depends on very clear instructions given by Parliament that might lead to regulation, but that cannot depend on the goodwill of the Executive Council, because this may never happen, as we have seen in the past 40 years. And when you said earlier that we might need to have a central agency in charge, how do you see that agency in terms of its powers of execution? Is it quasi-judiciary agency? So how would you imagine it being working, and with what executory powers? So the Treasury Board would have not just have the choice to act, but it must act so that it can intervene well upstream of problems emerging. And also, notwithstanding what's done by the Official Languages Commission, and well before complaints are lodged in federal court, the organization has to be able to force another department to do something or not do something when it might cause harm, and also to ask for accountability. If the Government of Canada is spending money, the government needs to know where the money is going. Thank you very much, Mr. Power and Mrs. Lattanzio. The next questioner is our second Deputy Chair, Mario Beaulieu.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to also thank our witnesses. My first question is for Mr. Laplante. I'd like to talk about the affirmative measures in Bill C-32, which would promote bilingualism, institutional bilingualism, fund pressure groups, Anglophone pressure groups. What do you think of this? I believe that we have here a series of examples which illustrate very clearly that legislation may be designed to undo another piece of legislation. What this particular bill has that is particular is to lead to the failure of some of the victims designated by the National Assembly in terms of language services. Means to challenge these clauses are such that the reference has been twisted by a mistaken conception of the place of English in Quebecers and of Francophone rights, because this overfunding of certain institutions creates a form of inequality which is detrimental to social cohesion. And I believe this is bad for everyone. And obviously, if taken to the extreme, it would hurt Francophone minorities in Canada who, for example, in British Columbia, and they are an important illustration of this, who have for years had to deal with being deprived of their rights, and especially have had to deal with conditions that are unacceptable in a democratic society. All this, we have to accept the principle of asymmetry. It's not symmetry that's necessary. Means have to be centralized, but these means should be conceived and enforced with the necessary diligence, so it is understood that institutions and organizations of the Francophone community need support, and also understanding that the National Assembly of Quebec should have every right necessary with respect to languages on its territory. Question. You talk about a conceptual flaw in the legislation because the Anglophone majority has imposed its constitutional rights on the Francophones in Quebec. Yes, this leads to a basic bias. Legislation in a society under the rule of law, legislation should liberate people with respect to legal situations. Now, constitutionally, and no Quebec government has accepted this, there are instruments, but they are inadequate within a framework that can only fuel distortion. It's not only a question of good faith and of setting a good example, but fundamentally, this is a question of legitimacy. Where is the legitimacy to help people protect French and to help see French develop? This has not been resolved through the repatriation of the Constitution, and it is not at the heart of the Act. Thank you. Mr. Power, you said that the problem we have in terms of the Official Languages Act and with respect to Francophone and Acadian communities outside of Quebec, but also to the problem of Anglicization in Quebec. This is asymmetry in action. Anglophones started off in a situation where their schools and institutions were overfinanced. There was the Laurent-Dunton report, which showed this, and outside of Quebec, completely the opposite situation. Francophones found themselves in a very difficult situation. So can you talk about asymmetry in a potential updating, modernization of the Act? Well, this holds for Quebec as well. If the Act were better, were better defended by courts, something like Netflix. I'm sorry, sir, you may be able to complete your answer with other questions. Now, Ms. Nikki Ashton, we're working as a team. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much to all our witnesses. First, to Ms. Christ. We've met before, but here we are meeting and talking about the decline of French in Quebec and in Canada. I believe that if the federal government abandons its responsibilities with respect to services to official language minorities, well, I'm going to emphasize what you said. You said the court ruled that following the adoption of the provincial territorial federal agreement, that employment services assistance under Part 4 of the Act should be provided for in both official languages. And this could be accomplished by implementing a federal plan. There are also provisions for fines under Part 7. Do you believe it's normal that we're still waiting for this modernization in 2022? Thank you for your question. I've been in British Columbia for a very long time. And we've been losing services, employment services, for 11 years. We've been dealing with this. Now, I have worked for centers that offered minority languages services, and it's closed. It was called La Boussole. and it dealt specifically with the homeless. So the most vulnerable of Francophones are being attacked. This is why the future legislation that you are studying, it has to have clear affirmative measures. I'm not a jurist, I'm not a legal expert, but there is a loss of services. Also, there's been a loss of help for these people who are homeless. We need solid clauses, a solid legislation to make sure that all aspects of our life in British Columbia are protected. Thank you. What you have shared is very touching. It's true. We've been studying this for years and will continue to do so, and to work on it. Mr. Power, in 2018, you were a witness when we were discussing the Official Languages Act update. Here we are, more than 3 years later. Do you feel that this very long delay has led to the decline of French in Canada? Thank you. Well, clearly, every day that the Act is not, the modernization is not implemented, yes. We were able to see the first version of a modernized Official Languages Act, a version that colleagues have said is very problematic. We very clearly identified problems, the problems in it for the government. For example, obligations that Treasury Board needs to assume, and the proper framework for the Act. Also, the obligation to consult. Now, the appellate court said that the government had not assumed its responsibility. And in the case of the FACB, they said that the government was obliged to intervene. The appellate court said that this was not done. So there is an obligation to enact certain provisions. Some communities are now asking that the government deal with these issues in the next iteration of the Act. And we hope that that will happen soon. 50 seconds. All right. Thank you very much. Ms. Chris, you met with Minister Joly when she was Minister of Official Languages. What points did you address? Because it seems that some points were forgotten in C32. Well, there are the 4 points I mentioned today when I made my presentation. We have nothing new to be addressed. All has been said. It's clear that we need these 4 points to be addressed. It's up to legislators to come up with a robust piece of legislation that will stand up in court. Thank you, Madame. Thank Chris. Thank you, Ms. Ashton. Now we're done with the first hour. So while the witnesses are here, I'd like to accord 2 extra minutes of questions. So 2 minutes. I'll be strict with the 2 minutes. Ms. Gladue, a point of order, Mr. Chairman. I think we have to maintain representational proportionality. The Liberals had 5 minutes. The Bloc Québécois, 2.5 minutes. The New Democrats, 2.5 minutes. If you're going to give 2 minutes to the Bloc and to the NDP, then perhaps you could give 4 minutes to the Liberals and 4 minutes to the Conservatives. Well, I'm going to do 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, 1 minute. That will that will respect proportionality. Ms. Gladue for 2 minutes. Or Mr. Dalton. Mr. Dalton? Thank you, witnesses. I'm very happy to see you, especially Ms. Chris. Your federation is an organization which really does a lot for Francophones and Francophiles in British Columbia. I think it's your 75th anniversary, if memory serves. Now, I know that you were here previously, and you took on the burden, during the pandemic, you took on the burden of dealing with this. So I don't have much time, and I have several questions, but Mr. Power, what concrete and ongoing what do you want to see with this agreement? What concrete and ongoing action do you want to see? The Federal Court of Appeals ruling, in its ruling, it talked about various things. Talked about consultations, linguistic provisions, and the appellate court provided a blueprint, a roadmap, a way to avoid litigation by inserting in the future Official Languages Act what is needed for the future of French. Mr. Dalton, this is necessary for a reformed Official Languages Act. I would recommend that you read the ruling in French and in English. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I said 2 minutes. Now, Madame Kaya-Baga for 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses.
I'd like to ask Mr. Laplante a question. What gaps do you find in the current Official Languages Act, and how can these gaps be filled? The main gap is to place on the same footing Anglophone minority in Quebec and the Francophone minorities in Canada. That's a major flaw, out of which comes a whole set of measures and provisions that don't take into account the sociological realities of the communities. And I think that the programs which have been challenged are often brought into long and interminable battles, essentially because of this error in understanding, especially when ultimately the decision is of a declaratory nature and there's no effect required. And the Act should include, especially in Part 7, provisions that make the conclusions drawn by courts or the minister executory. Otherwise, our friends will have to fight for 10 more years to get concrete results. So we have to distinguish the victory of the law from the change in society. You have 10 seconds, so should have enforceable measures. Mr. Mario Beaulieu, you have 1 minute. Yes, on the one side, Mr. Laplante, Quebec is trying to make French the common language on their territory in Canada, is saying, well, you have to learn French, we have to respect the Anglophone minority, but French is the common language. But the federal government comes and says, no, there are two official languages, two common languages. You can use the language of your choice. What do you think of that? 30 seconds. We're at the heart of the conflict of legitimacy. Who has the authority on the Assemblée nationale du Québec in terms of linguistic measures on its territory? And there, the sustained competition through the Canadian government's political choices can only serve to maintain social tensions that are harmful not only to the future of French, but to a good understanding between all parties. Thank you, Mr. Laplante. That's all. Madam Ashton, you have 1 minute in the final intervention of this round. Thank you. I would like to, first of all, ask Madame Christ this question, but if others want to chime in, that would be good. What is clear is that during consultations, either with a former minister or more recently, you have already identified problems. The communities identified their problems with the Act. Can you tell us how important it is that the new Act might reflect the concerns and priorities of the communities, as you've already done? You have 20 seconds. Our province, inaudible, has no policy of French services. We risk losing French language services. So for us, this new Act would give us the possibility of having services for our community. Thank you, Madame Christ. Madame Christ, Mr. Laplante, Messrs. Power and Bossé, thank you for your presence. If there's additional information you'd like to add, please don't hesitate to send this information in writing to our clerk, who will share it with all committee members. So don't hesitate to do this if you think you did not have time to give more details on whatever points we've discussed. So thank you for being here, and happy Valentine's Day. So we will take a short break to bring in our next group of witnesses. fine. We'll resume our work. Welcome to our next witnesses. So for the second hour today, we have by video conference Mr. Frédéric Lacroix, essayist on a personal capacity. From the Conseil du Patronat du Québec, Mr. Carl Blackburn, President and Director, and Mr. Denis Hamel, Vice President, Politics and Labour. And then third witness from the Société de la Francophonie Manavdaine, Angela Casey, President of the Board, and Mr. Daniel Boucher, Director General. So for each of the witnesses, we ask you to give us a short presentation, 5 minutes maximum, and I'll tell you when there's 1 minute or so left. So we will start with Mr. Frédéric Lacroix. First, you have 5 minutes. Well, hello. Over the past 15 years, an unprecedented linguistic dynamic has taken hold in Quebec. Since 1971, the demographic proportion of Francophones in Quebec had never fallen below 80%. It's now 78%, having fallen by 3.4 points in 15 years, a record. And it's a big concern. Demolinguistic projections by Statistics Canada indicate that the relative presence of the French-speaking group will continue to decline for the foreseeable future. To stop the decline of French in Quebec, we need to bring fundamental changes to the Official Languages Act. This law was passed in 1969. Its purpose is to ensure respect for English and French as the official languages of Canada and their equality of status, and to support the development of French and English linguistic minority communities. So it declared French and English as official languages and put them on a strictly equal legal footing without taking into account the sociological reality of English and French in Canada, based on a demographic balance of power. This balance of power means that English is a dominant language everywhere in Canada, even in Quebec. Book 1 of the report of the Royal Commission on Bilingualism and Biculturalism indicated that according to the 1961 census, English assimilated almost 9 times more, relatively speaking, than French in Canada. Thus, English is already has greater vitality in Quebec. The Official Languages Act, adopted by Pierre Elliott Trudeau's government, did not take this into account. In Quebec, Anglophones account only for about 8.1% of the population, half of all allophones. This means that in equal proportion, the Anglophone group has 10 times the assimilation power of the Francophone group in Quebec. So we are not in a situation of equal bilingualism in Quebec. Rather, it's a situation of unequal or competitive bilingualism. The OLA is based on the idea that language is the result of an individual's choice or preference. This is a principle of personality. This was and still is a nonsensical proposition. Language is not an individual characteristic. It's a means of exchange, discussion with others. It's by definition collective. And remember that the Charter of the French language is based in part on the principle of territoriality, requiring that in a given territory only one language serves as the language of convergence or common language. There's thus a conflict between the federal and Quebec approaches to linguistic planning. To my mind, the principle of personality has to be abandoned if we want true equality between French and English in Quebec. The OLA should recognize that Quebec is a French-speaking province. This would have many practical consequences. For example, an immigrant wishing to obtain permanent residence in Quebec would have to demonstrate knowledge of French and not English or French. And then the double majority. Through a situation of symmetry, the OLA establishes a double majority in Canada. Anglophones would be the majority outside Quebec, while Francophones would be the majority in Quebec. This is effective only if one considers that linguistic dynamic is determined by provincial boundaries. This is not true. The linguistic dynamic is determined by the country to which Quebec belongs, being Canada. The OLA is therefore concerned with the development of the English-speaking minority in Quebec. This minority is not a minority, but in fact is an integral part of the Canadian majority and possesses all of its attributes, including linguistic vitality. The OLA must abandon this concept of a double majority, which means abandoning grants for the development of English in Quebec. For example, funds allocated to the Canada-Quebec Agreement on Minority Language Education and Second Language Instruction, which enhance the status and vitality of English in Quebec. You have 1 minute. So 2 recommendations I would make is that discrimination against Francophone immigrants by the Federal Immigration Department undermines Quebec's efforts to attract Francophones or Francotropic immigrants who will integrate well to French Quebec. The power to select temporary immigrants, including international students, should be transferred to Quebec. And also, federal grants to Quebec universities are heavily biased against French language universities. Almost 40% of Ottawa's funding to Quebec goes to English language universities. Approximately 1/3 of federal funds are allocated to McGill University alone. There is systemic discrimination exercised against French language and universities in the allocation of federal funds. The allocation of funds based on criteria of so-called excellence rewards past winners and penalizes past losers. So these funds reward universities that are already the richest, such as McGill. Alternative criteria should be introduced into federal granting programs. Thank you, Mr. Lacroix. The next intervener is Mr. Blackburn or Mr. Hamel from the Conseil du Patronat du Québec. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, my colleague seems to have connection problems, which is really too bad because we could have had someone very competent to help us with replies. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Carl Blackburn, president of the Conseil du Patronat du Québec. Our organization was created in 1969 and is a confederation of nearly 100 sectoral associations and several corporate members that represent the interests of more than 70,000 employers of all sizes in all regions of Quebec, from the private and parapublic sectors.
Like all Francophones in Canada, employers in Quebec want to promote French as a working language, as a language of business. Our organization supports the efforts of Quebec employers to make French the working language of Quebec and to make it so in their own businesses. We have worked with the Office de la langue française in Quebec. We have taken part in the design of systems for employers, various memos. We are colleagues in francisation. We have also worked with a group that enhances and creates tools to promote French. We're trying to valorize and help businesses do business in French. We'd obviously be happy to work with the Department of Heritage, the federal department, in their efforts for francisation, not just in Quebec but all over Canada. We believe that our language puts us in a privileged position with respect to other countries. Our group, along with the province of Quebec, has signed an agreement on strengthening economic francophonie. We think this will help us in trade with other countries, just as the Commonwealth does, because there are 300 million French speakers worldwide. Our objective is to increase business opportunities and to work with foreign businesses. The francophonie also has very attractive potential in terms of the workforce and labor. Now, we believe that our language can become a starting off point for increased business. We'd like to draw the attention of the federal government to the support it could give to us, to Francophones, all over Canada, to Quebecers and Acadians, to increase their competitiveness. We want to help to promote the French fact in North America, and this can only happen by strengthening economic relations with other countries that have French as a language. Our group, which signed the common agreement in Paris, we have work that was made available to us by experts. In concluding, I'd like to draw the committee's attention to 2 things in particular. Recently, we polled our members on the question of language. And overall, employers are for the promotion of French and its defense as a language of work. They recognize the fragility of the common language, especially in Montreal, and as a culturally distinct language, realizing that all businesses have a role to play in defending our language. But we'd also like to see very clear legislative measures which will help us to decrease the bureaucratic burden. The second concern expressed by our members concerns the federal government. There are areas where the federal government should intervene. Employers should not be put having to deal with jurisdictional problems which can lead to confusion. Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. Thank you very much. We will now hear from the Société de la Francophonie Manitobaine. Sir. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to appear. The Manitoban Francophones are situated on several Indigenous territories. I'd like to recognize them. My name is Angela Kissy. I'm president of the SFM. Our organization speaks for the community of Francophones in Manitoba. We have a network of partners. I'd like to speak about three major themes. First of all, the urgency of modernizing the Official Languages Act, the priorities of Manitoban Francophones, and the insufficient efforts deployed to reach objectives with respect to French language immigration. I'd like, first of all, to say that the SFM agrees with the demands of the Federation of Francophone and Acadian Communities. What we are asking for is that Bill C-32 be dealt with. It wasn't something that was rushed. There was a lot of work done. Any additional delays will only weaken the position of French in our communities. Parliamentary work should be begun on it without delay. I agree that along with other Francophone communities that Bill C-32 has certain shortcomings that have to be dealt with. First of all, the Office of the Commissioner of Official Languages will have to be broad-ranging in order to issue orders and levy sanctions. At the present time, mere recommendations which are enforced in an asymmetrical way and don't have the necessary impact to protect official language minorities are not enough. And this leads me to another shortcoming identified in Bill C-32, and that is precisely in Part 7 of the Official Languages Act. We need to make sure that Part 7 is respected, and we have to have affirmative measures for a generous and common interpretation of the Act. One single central agency should coordinate work. Finally, the bill should include provisions for Francophone immigration, and it should identify and extend the demographic weight of Francophones. Now, for the community in Manitoba, the French-speaking community in Manitoba, in 2016, we adopted a strategic plan following a consultation carried out by a research team at San Boniface University. They talked about 5 axes, and this was agreed to by the FMS. Now, we think here again that Part 7 should reflect this action plan in its changing programs. We think that the public sphere should act as a partner in the the flourishing of our committee. I'd also like to talk about immigration and the initiatives that we have put in place in order to improve the reception and a settlement of new Francophone immigrants. Despite our efforts, a certain number of French-speaking immigrants, and this despite the reception capacity, immigrants with French as a spoken language were only 4.3%. We need audacious goals with respect to Francophone immigration. Thank you, Madam. When you answer questions, you'll be able to speak further to these issues. Now, you know, as is our policy, that there will be 6 minutes for questions. We'll start with Ms. Marilyn Gladu. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to thank our witnesses. I will begin with Ms. Cassie. We also spoke with the Official Languages Commissioner, and there was really a lack of consequences for those who did not comply with the legislation. Now, we need consequences. For example, if the Minister of Immigration spoke only in English, that wouldn't be acceptable. No consequences. What do you think we should do in order to improve this situation of lack of consequences? Well, this is why we want to give the Commissioner the power to levy fines and make orders. The present approach is not working. It does not inspire respect. It does not inspire compliance with the legislation. Now, we would love to get support for what we're doing. Another question. You have a very successful program for immigrants. Are there targets all over Canada? Yes, there are targets all over Canada, but we can't reach them. We're not reaching them. And this is why we feel that working at receiving these immigrants and helping them settle, because we know that between 2010 and 2019, more than 4,000 immigrants who could speak French came to Manitoba. And despite our efforts and despite the fact that we had an initiative to welcome them in 2020-2021, we only welcomed 301 immigrants and refugees. We have the capacity, we have the will. However, approvals are received too late, and we need far more audacious targets. Mr. Lacroix, when I was chairman of the Committee on the Status of Women, we had a discussion with women at from a program at a university in Northern Ontario. Now, Francophones in Ontario couldn't get a course, but there is a course in Quebec. but you have to live in Quebec to get the course. Would it be possible to get federal funding for these courses in Quebec, but to allow Francophones elsewhere in Canada to participate? Well, post-secondary programs in areas outside Quebec get only a fraction of the money that we would need. CEGEP and universities, English language, CEGEP and universities get 4 times the funding that Francophones outside Quebec get. So what is necessary is adequate funding. Now, education is largely a provincial jurisdiction. There is a provision for Francophones outside Quebec who don't have French language programs, who don't have access to having tuition covered, but there is a possibility of adapting the legislation. But these people may come to Quebec, these Francophones may come to Quebec and remain.
The idea would be to fund much more generously French languages colleges and universities and have French languages colleges and universities, not bilingual ones. 1 minute. My final question, Mr. Blackburn. You mentioned competition and the possibility of doing business with other Francophone countries. Can you give us some examples? Well, first of all, I'm very proud to have sent this agreement trying to promote aiming to promote economic Francophonie outside of Quebec. So Quebec can be the door to North American for companies that want to come and do business in French in Quebec or elsewhere, but also be a springboard for Francophones here who want to go out towards Francophonie outside of Quebec. So for us, it's very important. And when we look at the potential this represents in terms of population. Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. I'm sorry to cut you off in the most polite way. I'd like to welcome Mr. Hamel, your colleague, and Mr. Boucher, who have just joined us via internet. So thank you very much and welcome to you. The next question for 6 minutes will be asked by our colleague Patrice Latanzio. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me? I was having problems with my headset and I had to take it off. And the video isn't working very well. So I'll ask my question to whoever wishes to answer. We talked about this issue of immigration. What can we do? What more can we do to attract people who come to improve the quality of French throughout the country? Did you hear me, Mr. Chair? Yes. So who did you want to ask this question to? Mr. Blackburn. Go ahead, Mr. Blackburn. Thank you. Thank you for this question. This will allow me to introduce my colleague who's just joined us, Denis Hamel. Denis is a political vice president of Labour Development. So first of all, I would like our French language to become an attraction for companies throughout the world to come to Quebec and to Canada, because it's possible to do economic development in French. And when I look at the demographics for the next years, it's growing for the Francophone population. So for us, we see this as an opportunity for economic development. And that's why we don't want to use borders as being bulwark against the invader, but more as a springboard to allow us to have outreach in the world. And I'd like to ask my colleague Denis to ask some more specific answers to this question. Madam, you've raised two important aspects. You've mentioned the quality of the language, and that's something that's often neglected. And in Quebec, it's important to maintain good, strong French that has a good vitality, throughout quality, and so we really emphasize quality of the language. And so immigration helps us to do this. The bigger our pool of francophones and francophiles in Canada, the more the language will prosper. And we should be aware that on the immigration sites that the federal government shares with Quebec, that francophone be a priority. And outside Quebec, to maintain the vitality of Acadian francophone minorities, it's important that francophone immigration not only be limited to Quebec, and our goal is to maximize the French francophone space in Canada, and that's how we can share that expertise. Thank you. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left? Just under 3 minutes. So, in the same vein, this issue of immigration, we had some evidence last week that mentioned that the decline of French in Quebec could not be attributed, or could be attributed to the fact that there was a loss or reduction of fertility. So I understand that in order to compensate for this, we can resort to immigration. Or would there be other means that we could consider to counter the decline of French language in Quebec other than immigration? And who are you addressing your question to? Oh, Mr. Blackburn still. Thank you. Very good question. And I think the proper way to do it is to find a way to really increase the perception of value of the French language. So we have, over the past few months with a foundation in Quebec, observed something that's of great concern for our population. It's the very low level of literacy and numeracy. Unfortunately, one person out of two between 15 and 64 years old has issues with numeracy and literacy. So what we'd like to do is to equip ourselves with tools allowing us to provide learning of French, perfecting of French in our organizations and in our businesses, and that businesses who want to do this will receive incentives to do it, and to allow the employees in these organizations to perfect their French. And in that way, we can improve our numeracy and our literacy. Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. I didn't want to interrupt, but I would like to have enough time to ask you the following question. It's that Anglophones or allophones in Quebec, you'll agree with me, have made huge efforts over the past few years with programs such as French immersion and bilingual schools. Do you not believe that this effort on the part of other language minorities will help us to counter the decline of French in Quebec? You have 10 seconds. Denis. Well, quickly, yes, the message we want to send to communities. Thank you, Mr. Hamel. I'm really sorry to interrupt you. Well, could I have his reply in writing? Yes. I would like to, and I'll bring that up at the end of the session, Ms. Lattanzio. The next questioner is our second deputy of the Official Languages Community, Mr. Beaulieu. You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a question for Frédéric Lacroix. Inaudible. You were saying that there should be alternative criteria for the language of teaching in the federal grant programs to universities? Well, currently, programs are based on criteria of excellence. Inaudible. There was a historical aspect to this. So what was good in the past is good now. So there's a disproportionate effect that grows in time. So we should have the criterion of the language of teaching in the awarding of grants. So 40% of these grants go to the English language universities, but Anglophones are only 8% of the population. So if you have criteria of attribution on the language of teaching, the grants would be awarded 90% Francophone and 10% Anglophone, and that's fairer. So why are you saying 90%, 10%? We're rounding up the 8% of the Anglophone population to 10%. It should be 92 and 8. More specifically. So can you explain why this funding has an impact on the situation of French? So institutional complicity. This was invented by Raymond Breton, who noted that the linguistic vitality of a community is related to the extent of its institutional network. So if you apply this to Francophones outside of Quebec, we realize that given that there are few high schools and almost no French language universities, other than Moncton, there's no other French language university outside Quebec. So that really decreases vitality. So assimilation happens when Francophones leave high school, choose a program of studies, and they study in English, and they go towards assimilation. That can also be applied in Quebec, where the Anglophone community has a strong institutional network funded 3 times more than its demographic weight, so they can assimilate many Francophones or allophones. So the Anglophones in Quebec assimilate half of the allophones, even though they're just 8% of the population. So this institutional complicity is a key concept to understand how the vitality of a community is related to funding, to money. In a former session, we had the vice president of the Public Service Alliance in Quebec came to speak to us and said that even in Quebec, there's a strongly anchored discrimination anchored in the federal apparatus, which says that everything happens in English first, and then in French. I'm not an expert in the federal public service in Quebec, but what I understand is that English is the language of work more often than it should be in Quebec, and the language of work. So the freedom of choosing one's language of work in Quebec in the public service is an illusion. The federal public service is also subjected to unequal bilingualism. So that's I consider that a great problem for the vitality of the French language in Quebec. The federal government contributes to the devitalization of French in Quebec. Mr. Blackburn earlier mentioned the problem of modernization because the Quebec government, in its bill to strengthen Bill C1 or Bill 111, will apply that to programs under federal jurisdiction. But C3 said businesses will have the choice to either respect the Official Languages Act or 111. So how should it work, in your opinion? I think that businesses already have this choice of respecting the Charter French language or not. So the problem, to my mind, is that it's a choice. To my mind, 101 should apply to all federally regulated businesses, period. It should not be a choice. So very quickly, and then I'll give my colleague Denis the floor. So the results of surveys that we conducted under to our members, those were under federal jurisdiction, respected the requirements for the French languages, and But there were issues for smaller businesses where the administrative burden and the complexity of the federal-provincial relationship came and complicated the situation. And I'd asked Denis to give us some statistics. So it's this double jurisdiction, especially for annual reports and in case of complaints. So more than 80% of businesses under federal jurisdiction are already in conformity with the law. So make sure that these businesses feel pulled apart by two administrative burdens. One should have priority. Thank you, Mr. Hamel. I'm trying to interrupt you with at least a degree of rudeness. So now the next question, who will be asking questions, is from Manitoba, who has 6 minutes, Mrs. Nikki Ashton. Thank you, and thank you to all our witnesses today for having shared your testimony. I would like to say hello to the representatives, of the Franco-Manitoban Society. We're very proud of you here in Manitoba, and I'd like to ask you a few questions. Madame Case, the Société de la Francophonie criticized the way of calculating Francophones living in a minority situation. So do we have to review what constitutes a Francophone and have data that will reflect the reality best? Yes, to start with, I'll ask Mr. Boucher to add afterwards.
For me, as a Francophile, this is a very important part of our identity. So, in my opinion, the definition of Francophone as someone with French as the language spoken at home is an important one. And I think this will help us contribute to the flourishing of families who choose French as a second language, and for those with French as the first language to ensure that they have services. Michel, could you add something? Well, yes, this has always been a big problem for us. Canada recognizes our communities. Our communities have changed a great deal over the years. Francophones and Francophiles are those who have as their identity a sense of belonging to a community. Some years ago, we went to court to have clarified a certain regulation in terms of French language services. We succeeded in getting this regulation adopted. It was a means of identifying Francophones. We have people in Manitoba who come from all over the world. I have a family who were born in Africa and who are members of our community. First, they weren't identified as Francophones during a census, and we fought to have this changed. So I hope that positive actions will be taken in this regard. I'd like to see the legislation modernized. Another question. In Manitoba, there is a shortage of people to teach French, especially for very young children. And when there isn't a shortage of teachers, they don't have places in school for Francophones, spaces for Francophones in kindergarten and other schools. And these institutions are difficult to access. What can you do in order to slow second half of the question was not heard. I can address the second part of that question. last week, and it was a positive step undertaken by the provincial government. They agreed to put significant funds into a program to train teachers in immersion programs and in Francophone institutions. I believe we are all responsible for acting in a manner that we're able to create the infrastructures to teach French and to train people to teach French. We got this done in Thompson, Manitoba, and if you know Manitoba's geography, this is quite a feat. We need the necessary resources, and we really need to work together. And thank you, sir. Thank you, Ms. Ashton. Next question, Mr. Jacques Gourde for 5 minutes. Thank you, Chairman, and I'd like to thank all our witnesses. My question is for Mr. Blackburn. Economic francophonie is something of great interest to me. I think it has great potential. What countries are you looking at, and in what countries could we be dealing with in the near future? What are the sectors which might best benefit from this? Thank you very much, sir, for your question. It also allows me to talk about the extreme interest that we have in La Francophonie among business owners. There are 29 other Francophone jurisdictions in the world. There is France, but also countries of Africa, of North Africa, and others. There are several countries in Africa, and we are trying to help them make their francophonie an economic lever. Now, at the present time, there are approximately 300 million Francophones in the world, and soon there will be 500 million. So there is an extraordinary growth potential. Now, the issues we're dealing with in Canada, and especially in Quebec in terms of demography, well, you've heard from people from various parts of Canada. And we in Quebec have great problems with respect to an aging population. In 2031, 1 in 4 people will be elder. So our labor shortage has to do with demographic trends and the aging of the population. Now, I think we could be helped with respect to video games, technology, manufacturing potential, and health. These are sectors which have great potential. And we could have agreements and have cooperation with other Francophone countries, and we could work with them and help with training and coordination, so that their social challenges, along with their younger demography, would be something that we could be helped by, and we could create opportunities for these people. So there are instances of growth potential that are extremely attractive. We've also undertaken significant commitments having to do with demographic change, and that's only a beginning. I am persuaded that there is significant potential in all technical and technological sectors, above all. Thank you, sir. That's very inspiring. I have how much time, Chairman? You have 1 minute and 40 seconds. Well, for those witnesses who are from Manitoba, there is a problem that I find saddening. There have been many efforts deployed in kindergarten, grade school, high school, post-secondary education, but when students enter the job market, they lose their French. Do you think it's possible to have workshops or something that would motivate young people to keep practicing their French, because we invest a great deal in ensuring that there is a francophonie in the West, but unfortunately they lose their French. 30 seconds. Well, this is in fact the reason why we have a francophone Manitoban groups and society, so that they can live in French outside of work. But I believe that courses provided by universities in like Saint Boniface can help. But for us, it is our programs and our cultural institutions that help us. These institutions are very significant. Next question from Madame Kayabaga. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to begin by thanking the witnesses, and I'd like to thank the witness whom I have met before. I will be putting a question that I would like all of you to respond to. It was mentioned, was a great deal mentioned about immigration and about Francophone demography. There are a great many Francophones in Africa, especially East Africa. What could we do in order to change the context of immigration that you said? What was it? Could you say more about immigration from Africa? Would you like me to answer first? Yes, Mr. Lacroix, please. Well, there has been a lot of data that's appeared in newspapers, which would lead us to believe that those who come to Quebec to study in French are discriminated against, because a lot of them are refused residency and a path to citizenship, sometimes having to do with their English language schools, and from countries where they chose French as the language of study. This is in Quebec and in the rest of Canada. I think this is an immense problem. I think we have to try to understand what's happening at Immigration Canada to make this kind of thing possible. There is active discrimination. Excuse me for interrupting you. I don't know if you understood my question. My question was, what suggestions do you have for our committee to help increase this pool of immigrants from countries that have the most Francophones in the world? Well, could the committee make recommendations to the Minister of Immigration? Well, I'm asking you the question. What suggestions would you give our committee? Well, I think the committee should demand answers from the Department of Immigration and the Minister of Immigration with respect to what's happening to these immigrants. I think this is an issue that this committee should take up and deal with at the level of the department. Thank you. I'll now go to Mr. Blackburn. Mr. Blackburn, why do you believe the immigration rate? What do you think of this 3.4%? What do you think of this level of immigration? What is the impact it would have on Francophones in a minority situation? Well, thank you, Madam, for your question. I'm going to try to answer quickly with some statistics. I talked about a labour shortage in Quebec, which is far more serious here in Quebec with our demographics. We'd like to increase the pool of foreign workers who would be able to join the ranks of the workforce. There are countries who are signatories to an agreement made last year. There's also the global launching of a new organization to promote economic francophonie, and this new organization will allow Quebec to play a great role within la francophonie so that we can do more. And we believe in our group, we often talk about integration and maximum capacity, but we believe the best way to make immigration a success is with working with the communities and with stakeholders and businesses and all together. If we agree to objectives, we can make this collective challenge a collective success. You have less than 5 seconds, Madame. Thank you. You could tell that time is flying. To extend, we would need unanimous consent. I beg your pardon? All right. Well, we can't. We're going to have to end the sitting. I am very sorry, but before ending, Mr. Hamel, Mr. Blackburn, Ms. Cassie, Mr. Boucher, and Mr. Lacroix, thank you very much. It's been truly interesting. If there was something you couldn't add or you couldn't complete an answer, we would ask that you get this information to the committee. It will be distributed to all members, so don't hesitate. And with that, I'm waiting for Mr. Godin.
Particular request at the Conseil du Patronat du Québec. We talked about a study in Francophone countries. I don't know, Mr. Blackburn, if that international agreement is public, but if it would be possible for you to send it to the committee members if it's public via our clerk. Yes, we will make it available when we will officially launch it in the coming weeks. Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. Thank you, and happy Valentine's Day to everyone. Thank you very much. And before leaving, one last thing. So this coming Wednesday, we'll conclude this study. Then there is the week's break. And before that, Madam Clerk, we would like to receive the witnesses we want to call on for the immigration study. So before Friday of this week, in order to prepare for the coming weeks, we'll say Friday at noon as a deadline. And everyone in the virtual.
Friday, noontime, Ontario time. Please provide any witnesses that you'd like to hear at the for the study on immigration. Please, this coming Friday. All right, everyone? Merci beaucoup. La séance est levée.
Thank you very much. The meeting is closed.